My name is Elizabeth Blackwood. 6 months ago, I was one of Boston's elite, wife to investment mogul Malcolm Blackwood, heiress to a fortune, and living what everyone called a charmed life. Then my husband's private plane crashed in the Berkshires, and I discovered that everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my family, and my life was built on lies. This is my story, how I uncovered the truth, fought for justice, and rebuilt my life from the ashes of betrayal. My husband's ashes were still warm in the polished mahogany urn when I first noticed the way my sister looked at his portrait during the funeral. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes, not grief, but calculation. "He would have wanted you to stay with us for a while," she said, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "The penthouse will feel so empty now." I was 34, suddenly widowed, and the inheritor of Malcolm Blackwood's $87 million fortune. The Blackwood name adorned 3 buildings in downtown Boston, and our investment firm managed portfolios for half the city's elite. 2 hours earlier, I had sat stone-faced as Malcolm's will was read, leaving everything to me with a small trust for his elderly mother. "I'll be fine," I told Vanessa, pulling away from her touch. We had never been close. She was my half-sister, 5 years younger, from my father's second marriage. Beautiful, cunning, and perpetually envious of what I had. What I didn't tell her was that the penthouse hadn't felt like home for months before Malcolm's plane crashed. The silences had grown longer, his business trips more frequent. I'd found receipts for jewelry I never received and hotel stays in cities where he claimed to have meetings. The typical signs, I suppose, though I had buried my suspicions beneath layers of denial. 3 weeks after the funeral, Vanessa appeared at my door unannounced, wearing a loose silk blouse that couldn't quite conceal her slightly rounded belly. "I'm pregnant," she announced, walking past me into the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. "For months along." "Congratulations," I said, pouring myself a glass of the scotch Malcolm had collected. "Who's the lucky father?" She turned to me then, her eyes meeting mine with a practiced vulnerability I recognized from childhood, the look she'd perfected to charm our father. "Malcolm is," she said softly. "And I need to talk to you about what that means for his estate." The glass nearly slipped from my fingers. "That's impossible," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, the puzzle pieces of Malcolm's behavior in his final months began to shift and realign. "We've been seeing each other for over a year," Vanessa said, settling onto the white leather sofa. "He was going to tell you after the Thompson merger closed. We had it all planned out." "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. "You're claiming you were having an affair with my husband, your brother-in-law, and now you want his money?" She reached for her purse, pulled out her phone, and began scrolling through messages. "He loved me, Elizabeth. He said you two hadn't really connected in years." She handed me the phone. "See for yourself." The texts were unmistakably from Malcolm's number. Intimate messages, plans for a future, complaints about me. The last one was dated 3 days before his death. "Can't wait to start our real life together. He never understood me like you do." My hands trembled as I handed back the phone. "Get out." "I've already spoken with a lawyer," she said, rising. "Malcolm's child deserves his inheritance. Half the estate should go to this baby, his only heir. We can do this amicably, or we can let the courts decide." After she left, I called James Harrington, Malcolm's oldest friend and our company's chief counsel. "Is it possible?" I asked after recounting Vanessa's visit. The silence on the other end lasted too long. "James? I didn't want to be the one to tell you," he finally said. "Especially right after Malcolm's death. But yes, there were rumors at the firm. I saw them together once at the Bristol. They didn't see me." That night, I emptied the remaining scotch from Malcolm's prized collection, then smashed each crystal decanter against the marble fireplace. In the wreckage of my marriage, I found something unexpected: rage. Not just at Malcolm or Vanessa, but at myself for being so blind. My parents' reaction was swift and united, in Vanessa's favor. "You need to be realistic, Elizabeth," my father said during Sunday brunch at their Beacon Hill townhouse. "Malcolm's child deserves something. The courts will side with Vanessa." My mother nodded, dabbing at her lips with a monogrammed napkin. "Think of how this will look to society. The Blackwood name, dragged through gossip columns and legal battles. Better to settle quietly. I stared at them, these people who had always preferred Vanessa's vivacious charm to my steady reliability. You knew, didn't you? About the affair. My father looked away, but my mother met my gaze coolly. Malcolm confided in us 6 months ago. He was conflicted, but determined. He said you two had grown apart. And none of you thought to tell me? I stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. You let me live a lie while my husband and sister planned to abandon me? We thought it best to let Malcolm handle it his way, my father said. Now that circumstances have changed, we need to think practically. The Blackwood-Harrison merger depends on stability. A scandal would tank both companies' stock. Of course. The merger. My father's investment firm had been circling Malcolm's company for years. This wasn't about family loyalty, it was business. I'm leaving, I said, gathering my coat. And don't expect me at brunch next Sunday. Or any Sunday. As I reached the door, my mother called after me. We've started helping Vanessa financially. She needs proper prenatal care, a better apartment. I turned back. How much? $10,000 a month. From you, it would hardly be noticeable. I laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the marble foyer. Not a penny. Not one single penny. 3 days after the disastrous brunch, I was drowning in paperwork at Malcolm's home office when my private line rang. The number was blocked. Elizabeth Blackwood speaking. Mrs. Blackwood, you don't know me, but I worked with your husband. A woman's voice, hushed and nervous. My name is Diane Collins. I was Malcolm's executive assistant at the London office. I frowned. Malcolm didn't have a London office. A pause. That's what I need to talk to you about. There's a lot you don't know. Can we meet? Somewhere private? 24 hours later, I sat in a quiet corner of a hotel bar in Cambridge, away from the financial district where everyone knew the Blackwood name. Diane was in her early 50s, elegant and composed in a way that suggested years of handling delicate matters. I apologize for the secrecy, she said after ordering tea. But what I'm about to tell you could jeopardize my career. From her briefcase, she withdrew a leather portfolio. Malcolm maintained a separate office in London for certain sensitive clients. I've managed it for 8 years. She slid the portfolio toward me. 3 months ago, he asked me to prepare these documents. He never signed them because of the accident. Inside were medical records from an exclusive London clinic. Malcolm's name was at the top of each page, with a diagnosis I recognized immediately: azoospermia, complete sterility. According to the detailed report, Malcolm had been sterile since a mumps infection in his teens. That's impossible, I whispered, though the evidence was clear before me. We've been trying for a baby for years. The doctors said it was me, my hormone levels. Diane's expression was sympathetic. Malcolm never told you. I shook my head, remembering the years of fertility treatments, the monthly disappointments, the specialists who had focused entirely on my reproductive system while Malcolm provided minimal samples with convenient excuses. Why are you showing me this? Because yesterday, I received a call from a lawyer representing Vanessa Harrison, asking for Malcolm's medical records. She took a deep breath. I believe she doesn't know about this condition. And I believe you deserve to know the truth. I hired Patricia Winters, Boston's most ruthless divorce attorney, now my estate defense counsel. This is gold, she said, examining the London medical records in her corner office overlooking the Common. But we need to authenticate them. Your sister's team will claim forgery. How do we do that? Patricia smiled thinly. We need Malcolm's mother. A DNA comparison would prove both her relation to Malcolm and, more importantly, that your sister's baby cannot possibly be his. Malcolm's mother, Eleanor Blackwood, lived in a seaside mansion in Newport, increasingly reclusive after her husband's death a decade earlier. She and I had maintained a cordial but distant relationship, hindered by Malcolm's insistence on keeping family visits brief and infrequent. When I arrived at her estate unannounced, the housekeeper showed me to a sunroom where Eleanor sat reading, a regal woman in her 70s with Malcolm's same piercing blue eyes. Elizabeth, she said, not entirely displeased. What brings you to Newport without a holiday to justify it? I told her everything: Vanessa's claim, my parents' betrayal, the London medical records. When I finished, Eleanor was silent for a long moment. I always wondered when this would surface, she finally said. Malcolm knew he couldn't father children since he was 16. That's why he was so adamant about the prenuptial agreement protecting the Blackwood assets. You knew. I felt a fresh wave of betrayal. Of course I knew. I'm his mother. She set down her book. What I didn't know was that he kept it from you. That was unconscionable. Eleanor reached for my hand. I'll do the DNA test. And there's something else you should know. Malcolm has a brother. What? Malcolm was an only child. No, dear. Malcolm had a twin brother who has been in Europe for decades. They had a falling out years ago. They were identical in every way, except that David could father children. The Boston courthouse was packed for what the press had dubbed the Blackwood inheritance battle. Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table in a modest cream dress that showcased her now prominent pregnancy, playing the role of grieving lover and expectant mother perfectly. My parents sat directly behind her, a united family front against me, the cold widow unwilling to share her dead husband's fortune with his rightful heir. Richard and Margaret Harrison, pillars of Boston society and masters of maintaining appearances, had chosen their golden child once again. My father, with his silver hair and Brooks Brothers suits, had built Harrison Financial from nothing, teaching me everything about business while simultaneously undermining my confidence. My mother, with her perfect pearls and charity board positions, had always found ways to subtly critique my choices while praising Vanessa's most minimal achievements. Judge Caroline Abernathy, a no-nonsense veteran of the family court system with a reputation for cutting through emotional manipulation, observed the proceedings with sharp eyes behind rimless glasses. She had seen every trick in the book during her 30 years on the bench, and her expression suggested she wasn't impressed by the dramatic family scene unfolding in her courtroom. The plaintiff claims to be carrying the child of Malcolm Blackwood. Vanessa's attorney, Bradley Winston, began in his opening statement. Winston was known for his theatrical courtroom manner and custom Italian suits that matched his slicked-back hair, the perfect representation for Vanessa's performative grief. We have submitted extensive evidence of their relationship, including communications, photographs, and witness testimonies confirming that Mr. Blackwood intended to start a new life with Ms. Harrison and their child. When Patricia Winters stood up, the energy in the courtroom shifted. At 58, Patricia had built her reputation defending women in high-profile divorces. Her silver hair was cut in a precise bob, and her charcoal suit projected authority without flashiness. Unlike Winston, she didn't need theatrics to command attention. Your Honor, this case isn't about love or relationships. It's about facts and biology, she said, her voice clear and measured. The evidence will show that Mr. Blackwood could not possibly be the father of Ms. Harrison's child, making her entire claim fraudulent. Vanessa's confident smile faltered for the first time. The first witness was James Harrington, Malcolm's friend and colleague for over 20 years. Tall and distinguished at 62 with kind eyes that contrasted with his intimidating legal reputation, James had been caught between loyalties. Yes, I saw them together, he admitted under Winston's questioning. Malcolm told me he had feelings for Ms. Harrison. But under Patricia's cross-examination, his testimony took a turn. Did Malcolm ever explicitly tell you he was the father of Ms. Harrison's child? Patricia asked. James hesitated. No. He mentioned they were involved, but never discussed a pregnancy. Next came my father, Richard Harrison, who proudly recounted how Malcolm had confided in him about his true love for Vanessa. His testimony painted me as cold and career-focused, while Vanessa was portrayed as Malcolm's soulmate who finally made him happy. As Patricia began her questioning, she displayed a blown-up bank statement on the courtroom screen. Mr. Harrison, can you explain these transfers from Blackwood Investments to Harrison Financial, totaling $3.4 million, all occurring after Malcolm supposedly confided in you about his relationship with your daughter Vanessa? My father's confidence cracked. Business transactions. Completely separate matters. Really? Because the dates correspond exactly to meetings you had with Malcolm where, according to your calendar that we've subpoenaed, You discussed family matters. By lunchtime break, the courtroom was buzzing. I sat alone in a conference room when there was a knock at the door. A man I'd never seen before entered, tall, with familiar blue eyes that made my heart stop. Elizabeth? I'm David Blackwood. Mother sent me. Malcolm's identical twin brother had the same face I'd loved for years, but softer somehow, with laugh lines around his eyes that Malcolm had never developed. Where Malcolm had been all sharp edges and polished surfaces, David had a weathered quality, his hands those of someone who worked with them. You look exactly like him, I whispered. We were identical in appearance only, he said with a slight accent that spoke of years in Europe. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Mother explained everything. When court resumed, Patricia called her first witness, Eleanor Blackwood. Elegant even at 76, dressed in a navy suit with a single strand of pearls, she commanded respect from the moment she entered. The Blackwood matriarch had been a force in Boston society for decades before retreating to Newport after her husband's death. Mrs. Blackwood, what can you tell us about your son Malcolm's medical history? Patricia asked. Malcolm contracted mumps at 16. It left him sterile. Completely unable to father children, Eleanor stated firmly. This was confirmed by specialists at the time and again in his 20s. Winston jumped up. Objection. Hearsay about medical conditions from decades ago is hardly reliable evidence. Your Honor, Patricia countered, we have medical documentation and are prepared to present DNA evidence that will conclusively resolve this matter. Judge Abernathy leaned forward. I'll allow it. Continue, Mrs. Blackwood. Eleanor's testimony was devastating, describing how Malcolm had known about his condition his entire adult life. When Winston tried to suggest she was lying to protect family wealth, Eleanor fixed him with a glare that silenced the courtroom. Young man, I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I'm here because I won't allow a lie to tarnish my son's memory, however flawed he may have been. The final witness was Dr. Amelia Chin, a renowned geneticist from Harvard Medical School. Petite but authoritative, with decades of experience in paternity testing, she presented the results of the DNA comparison between Eleanor, David, and the amniocentesis sample that Vanessa had been court-ordered to provide. The results are conclusive, Dr. Chin stated. There is zero possibility that the fetus Ms. Harrison is carrying shares DNA with either Mrs. Blackwood or Mr. David Blackwood. Therefore, Malcolm Blackwood cannot be the biological father. The courtroom erupted. Vanessa's face crumpled as she buried her head in her hands. My mother looked shocked, but my father's expression was calculating, already forming a new strategy. Judge Abernathy's ruling was swift and definitive. Vanessa's claim was dismissed with prejudice, and the court ordered her to pay all legal fees. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us, but Patricia expertly guided me through the crowd to a waiting car. David joined us, having testified about his estrangement from Malcolm, a rivalry that began in childhood and culminated in Malcolm essentially erasing David from the family narrative after a business disagreement 20 years earlier. He always was good at rewriting history, David said as we drove away. I built the original investment algorithm that launched Blackwood Investments, but Malcolm took it and cut me out. Rather than fight, I left for Switzerland and started over. In the following days, pieces of the puzzle continued to fall into place. Diane Collins provided access to Malcolm's London operation, revealing a separate life he'd maintained, one that included questionable business practices and relationships I knew nothing about. The most unexpected revelation came a week after the trial. My phone rang with an unknown number. Elizabeth? It's Jason. Jason Winters. Jason had been my colleague at Harrison Financial before I met Malcolm. We'd dated briefly, but my father had made it clear that Jason wasn't Blackwood material, despite his brilliance as an investment strategist. I've been following the case, he said. There's something you should know about Vanessa. We met at a quiet cafe in Cambridge. Jason had aged well in the 8 years since I'd seen him, his former boyishness matured into confident good looks. As head of his own boutique investment firm, he'd done well for himself despite my father's attempts to blackball him in Boston financial circles. Vanessa and I were involved last year, he admitted, looking uncomfortable. It wasn't serious, at least not for me. When I ended things, she was furious. 2 weeks later, she started posting photos with Malcolm on her private Instagram. You think she targeted Malcolm to get back at you? Jason shook his head. I think it was more calculated than that. Vanessa always resented your marriage to Malcolm. She once told me she should have been the one to marry into the Blackwood fortune. But the texts, the photos of them together. Malcolm's phone was linked to the company cloud storage. Anyone with admin access could have created those messages. Jason hesitated. Your father had that access. The final piece clicked. My father had leveraged Vanessa's jealousy and Malcolm's company connections to orchestrate a scheme that would bring Blackwood assets under Harrison control, either through Vanessa's inheritance or through the merger that would have been necessary to stop a scandal. 6 months later, the Blackwood building lobby was renovated. The plaque now read, Blackwood Collins Investments, reflecting my partnership with Diane, whose London expertise had proven invaluable in rebuilding the company's reputation after the scandal. David had returned to Boston permanently, bringing his sustainable investment strategies that had made him successful in Europe. Together, we were transforming the firm into something Malcolm would hardly recognize, but something I could be proud of. My parents had retreated to their Florida home after the social fallout. Vanessa, her pregnancy showing her child to have dark features nothing like the Blackwood coloring, had moved to California with a hasty marriage to a tech executive. The DNA test had revealed the father to be Gregory Wilson, Vanessa's personal trainer, a fact she had desperately tried to hide. Eleanor visited often from Newport, mending our relationship and sharing stories about Malcolm that helped me understand the man I had married, a brilliant but deeply flawed person shaped by competition and secrets. As for Jason, our coffee meetings had gradually evolved into dinners, and then more. Taking things slowly, we were rediscovering what had been lost years before. What will you do with the penthouse? He asked one evening as we walked along the harbor, the city lights reflecting on the water. I thought about the space that had once been my prison of perfection, filled with Malcolm's carefully curated possessions and memories built on lies. I'm selling it, I said. Eleanor suggested donating the proceeds to fund fertility treatments for couples who can't afford them. Jason smiled, taking my hand. Malcolm would have hated that. I know, I replied, returning his smile. That's exactly why I'm doing it. The winter air was crisp against my face as we walked, the future unwritten before us. The fortune remained, but its purpose had changed, just as I had. No longer defined by Malcolm's choices or my family's manipulations, I was finally writing my own story. 1 year to the day after the court case, I stood in the new Blackwood Fertility Center at Boston Memorial Hospital. The plaque beside the entrance read, "Everyone deserves the truth about their family." Below it, in smaller letters, in memory of truths unspoken and lies revealed. Eleanor stood beside me at the ribbon cutting, her hand warm on my arm. David was there too, along with Diane, Patricia, and Jason, the unexpected family that had emerged from tragedy and deception. Malcolm would be spinning in his grave, Eleanor whispered with a wry smile. Or rather, spinning in his urn. I laughed. Something I could do freely now when thinking about my late husband. Good, I said. Let him spin. As we entered the center for the tour, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa, the first contact in over a year. I'm sorry. For everything. I read it twice before slipping the phone back into my pocket, leaving it unanswered. Some bridges couldn't be rebuilt. Some betrayals cut too deep. But as I joined the others, Jason's hand finding mine, I realized that forgiveness wasn't the same as reconciliation. I could release the anger without allowing the same people back into my life. The fortune that had nearly torn us apart had ultimately revealed who people truly were, and in that painful truth, I had found freedom. Ready? Jason asked. I nodded, stepping forward into the future I had built from the ashes of deception. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, justice, and redemption, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our new uploads. Leave a comment below telling us what you thought about Elizabeth's journey and share this video with someone who loves dramatic true stories. For more captivating content like this every week, Join our growing family of subscribers. Remember, the truth always finds a way.